Hi everybody. Well, we finally made it to Europe. We left yesterday, Saturday, March 21st. We actually got to LAX airport at 5 in the morning, and we didn't actually get to take off until 10 because of difficulties with the plane. And we got here today, this is Sunday, at 8:30 this morning. So it's been a very long flight, but we made it and we're happy. We have to stay up this whole day today so we can catch up with the time because we're about a day ahead. And we've been just coming from the airport to here to the hotel. We're staying at the Regency was a trip because there's so many beautiful sights everywhere in London. We're really excited. We're getting ready to go to lunch right now, and then we're going to go and look at some pictures at the park. We're right across the street from a park called Kensington. It's a big park in London. They have parks all over London, and they love going out in the parks and walking around, and it's just beautiful.
Flower gardens.
And flower gardens everywhere. Mike's getting ready right now. That's what you heard. So anyway, we're staying at the Regency here in London, and we're just going to have a great time. So I'll talk to you guys later, and I'll take you on a tour tomorrow. Bye. Okay, this is the view from our room out the window of Kensington Park. It's a humongous park. It goes for blocks and blocks and blocks, and right there, I'll try to zoom in on it. You can see some of the beautiful flower beds. They just have beautiful flowers. Everything's blooming right now. Today, well, I guess yesterday was the first day of spring, and it's just beautiful out here. On the way over here, they were telling us they haven't had any snow this year, and that's why everything's blooming so soon. And I'll zoom out here, and you can kind of see how they drive on the wrong side of the road down here. It rained just a little bit. It's weird here. It rains for like 5 minutes and then it goes away. Anyway, that's a view of the park. Talk to you later.
Hi everybody. Well, it's Monday morning in London, and we were up at the crack of dawn. We're dressed and ready to go downstairs and have our continental breakfast. Today we're going to have a guided tour going to the west end of London. We're going to see Buckingham Palace. We're going to see Piccadilly Circus and a couple of, I believe, Westminster Abbey. And that's only a half-day tour, so after that what we're going to do is we're going to go off on our own. We're going to go shopping at Harrods, the famous place in London. Everybody says we have to go to Harrods. And maybe we're going to go to Madame Trousseau's, which is a wax museum everybody's talking about. So we're going to run on our own this afternoon, and we'll be the guided tour this morning. And see, right now it's kind of drizzling off and on. It may be a little cold today, but otherwise it looks like the sun can come out at any moment and clear everything up, and that's what's really neat about it. And that's about it. So we'll see you guys later.
Of England. Then you have the City of London further to the east of us, which is the old Roman city, generally referred to as the 1 square mile, which is the area that it in fact does cover, and that is the financial headquarters of England. And it's most important to remember that London is divided into those two separate cities. They're each governed quite separately, and the City of London even has its own police force who wear different uniforms to those in the West End here. Now this morning we're concentrating on the City of Westminster. We're going to give you a little panoramic look round so that you get an idea, and then we'll be going into Westminster Abbey, and then from Westminster Abbey we'll be taking you back to the respective hotels, except those of you who have mentioned they want to go elsewhere, like the changing of the guard or other places. Now we're in North London at the moment, or north-ish, but we're now going down into the centre of the West End. Much of the area where we are now is a prime residential part of London, and practically all apartments. If you buy an apartment anywhere in London, you have to buy it on a lease, and the lease will vary between 30 and 99 years in length. The longer it has to run when you come to sell it, obviously the better off you are. If you happen to keep the lease until it runs out, then that's the end of your money, and the freeholder will re-lease it all over again. Now, if you buy a house, you buy it freehold, which means you own the house and the ground that it stands on. This is much more expensive initially, but eventually it's a much better deal. Now, house prices in London have dropped an awful lot in the last couple of years, and it's in fact quite difficult to sell properties at the moment. Things were looking up a little bit. Now with the election and everything, it's stagnated and will do until that's over. But up until 2 years ago, the prices of houses and apartments in London had risen at the rate of 25% per annum over the previous 5 years. So in those days, if you'd had your money in bricks and mortar, you were more or less laughing all the way to the bank. But things have changed quite a lot with the huge hike in interest rates that we have had over the last 2 or 3 years. People just haven't been able to afford the mortgages. Current interest rate now, I think, is about 10.75%. It's changing so much that I can hardly keep up with it, but it's somewhere around 10.75%. Just on the right here is what used to be 221B Baker Street, the home of the fictional detective Sherlock Holmes. You may have noticed the Abbey National Building Society was on the site now. The Abbey National actually have to employ a special secretary whose duty it is simply to answer all the mail that the non-existent detective still gets each day. I hope the weather's going to. Alan's on the right. Now, the reason why the Duke of Westminster owns this area and Belgravia goes back to the 17th century, when there was a young heiress called Mary Davis. She was only 12. You'll see the street ahead of us is called Davis Street, after the young heiress. Her mother decided that despite the fact she was only 12 years old, it was high time she was married off to a suitable man, so they held a marriage market, and the man who paid the most for her hand in marriage thus inherited these two very rich areas when developed, and that was Thomas Grosvenor. They've been in the Grosvenor family ever since. The Duke of Westminster is the richest man in England, second richest person after Her Majesty the Queen. He has an estimated daily income of £350,000. Now that is just from the properties he owns. The reason that he's so rich is he has never ever, nor has the family, sold any of the buildings, be they shops, offices, apartments, whatever, on anything but a short lease, no more than 20 years in length. So at the end of the term of the lease, it merely reverts back to the Grosvenor estates, and so they go on releasing here since the 1700s, in Belgravia since the 1800s. Duke of Westminster's only 40, just 40 this year, so he's not doing too badly. Now we're coming up to Piccadilly. Piccadilly takes its name from the piccadille, which was a high white ruffled collar worn by the Elizabethans during the 16th century, and the gentleman, tailor who made the piccadille, lived here in the street we're about to turn into, hence Piccadilly. Every street in London is called what it is for a very specific reason. As we turn left, you'll see the Ritz Hotel on your right-hand side. It's presently straight ahead of us. This was where Charlie Chaplin had his first job at the age of 8. He was a bellboy here. He then went on to make many black and white movies in the 1940s. The Ritz Hotel is a nice place to go if you want a traditional English tea. Just be warned, though, that if you want to go to tea at one of the big hotels, you need to book in advance, just as you would for dinner. It'll also set you back £13 a head, and women may not wear trousers to go into these hotels. Now, Piccadilly isn't really a shopping street in the strict sense of the word. There are one or two extremely famous shops which we'll be passing, but it's much more well known as being venue of a lot of airline offices, and also the Royal Academy of Art, which we'll pass in a moment. And the next street on the right, the next big street at the traffic lights, leads down to St James's Palace, and you may just catch a glimpse of the Henry VIII gateway if you look down to the right hand side here. It's at the bottom with the clock on it. On the left hand side, Bond Street, the road that runs to our left now. That is the most expensive shopping street in London. Then on the left you'll see a red awning. This is the entrance to the Burlington Arcade, which is well worth walking down. It's very pretty. You'll see the hanging baskets all the way down it. It's an 18th century arcade of shops. On the left, the Royal Academy of Art, and on the right, one of the most famous stores in London, Fortnum and Mason. Fortnum and Mason is always known as the Queen's grocery store. It's a nice place to go and get gifts to take home, like English teas and biscuits and all that sort of thing. And they still wear tail coats, the gentlemen who serve, on the ground floor, so it's quite fun. On the right-hand side, St James's Church, Piccadilly, which is the only church outside the City of London designed by Sir Christopher Wren. Those of you taking the city tour later will be hearing a lot more about Sir Christopher Wren. He designed St Paul's Cathedral. And coming up on the right, you'll see Simpson's, which is a famous clothes store, a bit on the conservative side, but well known for clothes for both men and women. And if you look above the porch, you'll see 3 coats of arms. These are the coats of arms of the Prince of Wales, the 3 feathers from this end. In the centre, the Duke of Edinburgh, and at the far side, Her Majesty the Queen. These are called royal warrants. When any of these 3 members, or Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother, shop satisfactorily at a shop for 3 years or more, they're entitled to give their royal warrant or seal of approval. This is of course what all shops want to have. It's very good for their image. Most of them rather wish the Princess of Wales gave her royal warrant, because she's the great shopper in the royal family. If that were the case, practically every boutique in London would have her coat of arms above the top. Now we're coming up to Piccadilly Circus. Piccadilly Circus used to be famous for all its neon lights, still is to a certain extent, but nothing like it used to be, because one whole side has now been redeveloped, the salmon pink building. It's also famous for the statue of Eros, which you will see on our right hand side as we come into the circus. Eros is the angel of Christian charity, the winged figure of peace, and a memorial to Lord Shaftesbury, who was the Victorian philanthropist. Eros is made of aluminium, which is quite unusual for a statue. The steps of Eros are always a famous meeting place. On the right-hand corner is Lily White's, which is a very famous sports department store, the biggest of its kind in Europe. And to the left-hand side is the end of Regent Street, the other main shopping street. So all the main shopping streets are quite close together. The street which is presently straight ahead will be on the left is Shaftesbury Avenue. Shaftesbury Avenue is where many of the London theatres are situated. Also 2 famous areas off Shaftesbury Avenue. To the left-hand side, Soho, where a lot of the night spots are. To the right-hand side, Chinatown. Now straight ahead would lead us to Leicester Square, and in Leicester Square you would find the half-price theatre ticket booth. If you go there after 2:30 p.m. you can get half-price theatre tickets for that day's performance only. But you won't get them for anything like Miss Saigon, Phantom, Cats, Les Miserables, but you will for some of the other very good shows. Leicester Square down to our left now. Now we're coming down Haymarket, called simply that because the cabbies, in the days when the cabs were horse-drawn, would bring their cabs and horses to this area to feed and water the horses. There are 1 or 2 theatres down here, and also the main branch of Burberry's Burberry's is where you can buy the famous trench coat, but watch out, it's generally cheaper in America than it is here. Thames. The reason why it's so important is when the Romans invaded in AD 43, the only place they could bridge the river was where they built their city of Londinium, where our present financial headquarters are, about 5 miles down to the left-hand side here, or to the east. So the River Thames is the whole reason why London is situated where it is, and thus very important. It is the second longest river in England, after the River Severn. It rises in the Cotswold Hills to the northwest of us, and it goes out to sea approximately 35 miles to the left-hand side here. It is a tidal river, varies between 16 and 25 feet per tide. On the right-hand side, you'll see Whitehall Court, this rather pretty fairy tale-like looking building. That is a hotel, used to be apartments. George Bernard Shaw had an apartment there. There still are a few left. And you'll notice that the Thames is more or less at low tide. Now the building which is directly opposite us and slightly right, it will be on our left in a minute, County Hall, is just being sold today at the knockdown price for £200 million. Was on for sale at 350 million. They've had to make a slight reduction, almost 50%. Japanese have bought it, and it's now going to be yet another hotel and apartments. So Whitehall Court on the right, River Thames on the left, and County Hall beyond it on the left. The big building with the green roof coming up on the right is the Ministry of Defence. Now we're coming towards the Houses of Parliament and Big Ben. Big Ben, incidentally, is not the name of the clock, it's the name of the bell within the clock, called after Benjamin Hall, who was a commissioner of the works. He was a very small man, he was always nicknamed Big Ben. It is the timepiece upon which we set our clocks and watches, so now is the time to put your watch right if in doubt. It's exactly 9:30. Now the Houses of Parliament are divided into two. The House of Commons this end, attached to Big Ben, and the House of Lords at the far end. The House of Commons is where the 650 elected members of Parliament sit. Those are the men and women who represent the constituencies throughout England, Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales. The House of Lords is where the hereditary and life peers sit, the bishops and the law lords. Now the House of Commons is not sitting at the moment. Parliament was dissolved in order for the members of Parliament to get the election campaign underway, and then it will be reformed after the general election by whichever government happens to get in. Now the whole of the building, and you'll get a much better idea of it in a short while because we're going to give you a better view in a moment, is not as old as it looks. The bulk of the building was burnt down in a fire in 1834. So what you see is Victorian, dating from the 1840s, with two exceptions. The House of Lords, which is the House of Commons, which is straight ahead of us, was very badly bombed on the night of May the 10th, 1941. So what you see has all been rebuilt post-war, 1950s, but it's impossible to see where because they've matched it up so well. You can actually see evidence inside but not out. Then there's a part that I'll show you in a moment, Westminster Hall, which is all that escaped the 19th century fire and is thus the original 12th century building, and that's Westminster Hall, and you'll see the different style of architecture at a glance in a moment. Now this is Westminster Bridge on the left-hand side here. And coming up on the left, you'll see a statue of three ladies in a chariot. It's quite close to us. This is Queen Boadicea and her two daughters. Queen Boadicea was leader of the Iceni tribe, and she came down to London in the 64 AD when the Romans were actually here, and she stormed London. Having done so, she got in a bit of a panic, so she committed suicide with herself and her 2 daughters all at once. Now, if you have a look at the chariot closely, you'll probably be, or certainly you men, will probably be tempted to make rather rude remarks. Most people say, typical woman driver, no reins, totally out of control. Now, as we come close to the Houses of Parliament, you can get a good look at just how intricately designed the building actually is. All this work done by Pugin. Now, Pugin was obsessed with the Gothic design, which is basically anything pointed. So obsessed was he that he used to insist that his wife bake him cakes and puddings in the Gothic style, or he refused to eat them. He actually died round the bend, but he did leave us this legacy, which is this beautiful building. You'll notice when we turn the corner, on the left, a row of writing just beneath the windows. It goes the whole way round the Houses of Parliament. That is the Lord's Prayer in Latin.
What do you mean when you say died around the bend?
Died around the bend means mad. What do you call it?
Crazy.
Just crazy. Crazy.
I thought you meant he died around the corner.
Me too. That's what I thought.
No, he didn't die around the corner. He died mad.
What do they use for heating over here?
Heating. Gas central heating, mainly.
And they used to use what?
Open fires. Yeah. Which is why these buildings are so black. These are being cleaned.
That's why all the chimneys, I suppose, on the building.
Now we're coming into Parliament Square, and as we turn left you'll see a beautiful statue of Sir Winston Churchill. A very good likeness of him. It's the most recent statue in Parliament Square, arrived here in the 70s, and he's on the right as we turn, overlooking his beloved House of Commons on the left-hand side here. Now you'll see Westminster Hall, which is this plainish building with the Norman windows, the rounded tops. This is all that escaped the fire. So what you see on the left is 12th century. That's what the whole building originally looked like, this plainer style of architecture. Then we have on the left-hand side the House of Lords. On horseback, a statue of Richard Coeur de Lion, Richard I of England. Then coming up on the left-hand side, where the scaffolding is, you'll see some big black wrought iron gates. These are only used once a year for the state opening of Parliament, on the left, when Her Majesty the Queen arrives in the Irish state coach wearing the imperial state crown, the only time it's worn apart from the service of coronation. And there will be obviously an extra state opening of Parliament this year after the election. It's been like that for, it must be a year or 2 years now, probably another year to go, I should think. But it'll look wonderful when it's finished. Now we're just going to pause here. If anyone would like to nip off and take some photographs, please do. The best thing to do, well, I'll walk you up there, is to walk straight ahead and cross over the bridge to the other side. Okay, those of you who would like to stretch your legs and get some photographs.
Big Ben. Here's Mike exiting Westminster Abbey.
You'll see an equestrian statue immediately on our right, which is of King Charles I. He was the one executed just down Whitehall, so he's looking down to his execution site. And it is from this statue that all distances to and from London are measured. So if it's 3003 to New York or whatever it is, it's measured from this spot. If you have a look at all the pigeons sort of straight ahead and rightish, you'll notice there's a little man that sells pigeon seed. It's a very cheap form of entertainment. For about 25 pence you can purchase one of these little bowls of pigeon seed, and for that you'll have the pigeons sitting all over you, flapping all over you and doing all sorts of other things all over you as well. He had his licence revoked a few years ago, and so all the pigeons went away, but now he's got it back. They're all back with a vengeance. Minutes-wise or miles-wise?
Well, depends on how fast you walk.
About 15 or 20 minutes. Now we're coming through Admiralty Arch now. Centre gateway usually only used for Her Majesty and her procession, but because it's undergoing repair we're allowed to use it at the moment. You'll notice the road changes from black to red because this is a special surface to stop the horses slipping. It's also royal property, therefore red, like the red carpet. On the right, the Carlton Terrace, which is the backs of various art galleries and gentlemen's clubs, etc. On the left-hand side is St James's Park, which is undoubtedly the prettiest of all the royal parks in London and the smallest. Now coming up on the right-hand side, you'll see some steps at the top of which is a statue. It's just beyond all these coaches. And that's the George VI, late husband of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and father of our present Queen. So King George VI on the right. Then the big reddish coloured building is Marlborough House, which was built for Sarah, Duchess of Marlborough, an ancestor of Sir Winston Churchill. It is the Commonwealth Secretariat now. And just beyond that, St James's Palace, the other side of which we saw earlier. St James's Palace is practically completely covered in plastic and scaffolding. Now, anybody who's interested in photos, there are spare seats on the right. You might want to make your way over to the right because we're going to pass the... No, we don't. Stay sitting. I think he's doing the traffic to the right of them. They're going to be on our left. The foot guards. These are the old guard who have been on duty at St James's Palace, who are going down to Buckingham Palace to meet with the old guard at Buckingham Palace prior to the changing of the guard. They're going to be on our left-hand side in a moment. You get a lovely view of them. St James's Palace to the right. Aren't you glad you aren't with all these people? Much better to be in the coach. On the right, the elegant creamy-coloured building is the home of an elegant lady, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. That's Clarence House on the right. Queen Mother is 92. Or she will be 92. I mustn't age her unnecessarily. She's 91 and a half. Now I'll tell you what regiments these chaps are in a moment. These are the old guard who've been on duty for the past 48 hours. The sentries are only on duty for 2 hours on, 1 hour off. These are the Scots Guards. Now we're coming down to the Victoria Memorial. You'll see Queen Victoria looking at us. She's a very bright white nose because she was vandalised, and when they came to match up the stone they did a very bad job of it. Now those of you who are going to get out, the palace is just in front of us here. Don't try and stand in front of the palace because you will see absolutely nothing. There are too many people. Get in the centre on our right here. That's where you want to get. and then you see all the activity, and it goes on until about 12:10.
So like right here with this.
Yeah, in the centre here, because all the guards will then come out and reverse what they're doing. The new guard go back near the palace. Even if you... Oh, this is lucky. That is lucky. That rarely happens. Not a real... It is important to remember that these guys, although they look as if they're on ceremonial duty only, they are normal fighting soldiers of the British Army like any other regiment. They've seen active service very recently in the Gulf, in the Falklands, they're still in Northern Ireland, some of them. So this is just a part of their duty, and it is important to remember that. The Queen is not resident. You'll notice that the Royal Standard is not flying on the palace. She never is here on a Monday morning. She spends every weekend at Windsor, and she'll come up this afternoon. And we're going to drop you just over the other side of the palace, so you'll just have to walk round, and they have crossing points where you can cross. One of them's here on the left, where this lady policeman is.
So where's the actual, where the...
They actually change the guard behind the black and gold railings in front of the palace, but unless you get there at 9 o'clock in the morning, you've got no hope of getting anywhere near it. But all they do is stand and look at each other in there. In a minute, the new guard is going to come from the barracks up here on the left.
Get it? Yeah, that's all I
This is Buckingham Palace, where we just saw the changing of the guards. Across the street is a beautiful statue. Hi everybody, we're in the Tube. It's the underground subway in London. We just came from Harrods, shopping. Michael's very tired. We've got to get him back and have him take a nap so we can walk tonight. But I just want to show you how clean the underground railway is here in London. It's great. You can take it anywhere in London. It's beautiful and it's a very clean railway.
Castle. We're waiting to get in because it's cold and windy.
We're at Windsor Castle.
Yeah.
There's a pigeon.
This is the weekend retreat of the Queen. She comes here on the weekend to Windsor. Okay, we're at Windsor Palace right now. This is like the, I should say, backyard of Windsor Palace. Very beautiful, very green. Here we are on the inside of the palace, kind of like the walkway. This is the entrance to the Windsor Castle. This is where all they have their pageantry and so forth when they have heads of state. like Buckingham Palace, they have guards here also. Here we are at the entrance of Windsor Castle. It's located right in Windsor, the town of Windsor. We're going to be going into the town of Windsor in just a moment. cabs actually drive right through the train station to pick up passengers off the train. Now we have to catch the tube all the way down to where we're staying in London. Good morning, it's March 25th, it's about 8 o'clock here in London, and we're just getting ready to go to breakfast. Just wanted to kind of tell you what's going on right now. Yesterday we went to Windsor Castle, excuse me. I call it palace all the time, and the English don't like you to call it palace, it's a castle. That's the weekend castle of the Queen, and we took the tube down to a train station, beautiful train station which you saw previously on the film, a humongous train station. And then we caught the train to Windsor. Windsor is a very beautiful little city with the castle there, and we took a tour of the castle. It was big. Went shopping and then went back to Windsor, and then had to go through this town called Paddington back to London. It was quite an experience. We've traveled on every form of transportation they have. We've gone on taxis, the buses, the double-deck buses, the underground tube, and the trains. Excuse me. Last night, of course, we went to see Miss Saigon. We were 3 rows back, section C. Very good tickets. I mean, we actually could make eye contact with the performers. And the girl who stars in it is a 16-year-old from London, and she was just absolutely fantastic. The show itself is great. They actually have a helicopter that lands on the stage, which is it's just indescribable. From there we caught the taxi back, went out to eat, and came in and had a drink at the hotel and went to sleep, because today we have a big day planned. We're going to go down to the Tower of London to see the jewels of the Queen jewels, I think they're called, and from there we're going to go have lunch at the Hard Rock Cafe, and then do some shopping for antiques and so forth. Phil would love it here at this time of year because it's spring, and the flowers are just beautiful here. I mean, there's all different types of flowers. I'm sure Phil would be more would know what they were, but they're gorgeous, and everything's blooming. The trees, everything. I just wanted to show you also, this is a magazine that is put out here called Timed Out. It tells you how to get around London and what's going on in London. A very popular magazine. And on the front of it, of course, is Warren Beatty and his new wife. The American stars are very popular over here. For some reason, we were talking to an English person yesterday, and for some reason their stars and their movies industry is really not doing very well right now. They're in a recession right now, as is the USA, but their recession seems harder for some reason for them. Also, something interesting is they're in the middle of a drought right now, which is interesting because it usually rains here at night, but starting next month they're going to start the water rationing, which is very interesting. So other than that, we'll see you later. I'm going to take my camera today and try to get some good shots, and see you later. Bye.
Hi everybody, we just got off the tube, and we're now at the Tower of London. And it's right over there. We're just going to take a shot. Go ahead and take a look.
At the Tower of London.
And of course, this is where we still keep the crown jewels. And may I add at this point that this fortress has never ever been successfully attacked throughout its long history. But enough about the tower. Let me take your thoughts outside for just a couple of moments. Can you see that rather large white on it building through the skyline, on the skyline there? You may just well be able to make out Union flags flying round it. Well, that building was the headquarters for the Port of London Authority. They were responsible for all the shipping on the River Thames over here. The building itself has got nothing whatsoever to do with the tower. So why do I mention it? Well, in front of that building, there is a very small garden called Trinity Green. And that has everything to do with the tower, for it marks the site of the first public scaffold in England, where no less than 75 men of noble birth were to lose their heads by way of the executioner's axe. The very first man in 1381 was a man by the name of Simon Sudbury. The last man in 1747, by remarkable coincidence, was another Simon, Simon Fraser, the Lord Lovat, an old Scottish earl. Let me just briefly recall the procedures carried out on Tower Hill. 1 hour before any public execution, the curfew bell within the tower would ring. That was the signal for the citizens of London to gather up out there in their thousands. And they were a drunken rabble in those days. Remember, this is long, long before football or television or even that other good old English game, bingo. It was considered good sport to go out there and watch these poor unfortunates lose their heads by way of the axe. The victim, having first of all paid the executioner for the privilege of being beheaded by him, would place his or her head upon the block. If a man, when ready, he would stretch his arms out like that. If a lady, she would drop a dainty little kerchief. Then, and only then, down would come that great axe and off would come the head in one mighty swipe, we hope. The executioner would bend down, he would grab that severed head by the hair, or if it was a bald person, by the ears. He would then hold it up and show it to the four corners of the scaffold, crying out at each corner, "Behold the head of a traitor, so perish all traitors, God save the king." It would then be securely jammed and twisted onto a pike that was carried by a soldier. That soldier then had the honour and the privilege of leading a great procession through the streets of London before the head would be eventually respiked on top of the old wooden London Bridge that stood slightly upstream from this point. That was the only bridge across the river of those days. The head would then be left there as a warning for all other would-be traitors. Until eventually, of course, at this time of the year, the birds would get at its eyes, it would start to rot. Slide slowly down the pole over the bridge into the waters of the Thames to be lost forever. Right, question time. Hands up if you've heard enough of blood and gore. 3.5, one's not quite sure. This side is known as the Inner Wards. This is, in fact, the Royal Palace itself. And before we see the White Tower, that very first one ever to be put up. Every other building that you can see round about you was built with this one single tower in mind. Work commenced on building the White Tower in 1078. It took just over 20 years to complete, and the work was carried out under the direction of a Norman monk called Gundulf, who later became the Bishop of Rochester. This tower stands 92 foot tall. It is almost 4 square in plan, and the walls down at the base are 15 foot thick. They taper to something like 11 foot thick right at the very top. On top of the tower there are 4 turrets. 3 of the turrets are square, 1 is round. Here is the round one here. That was where the Royal Observatory was first established. On top of the turrets, or the 2 you can see this side, you may well be just able to make out a weather vane which is inscribed with the Royal Standard, the whole lot surmounted by a golden crown to denote that this is still a royal palace. Although royalty no longer lived here, they did in fact occupy this tower for just over 500 years. And in the main, they lived on the topmost floor. The second floor down was given over to council chambers, banqueting chambers, and accommodation for knights and their ladies. The third floor down was given over to servants and retainers. There was a 4th floor, partly underground, and which could only be reached by way of an internal stairway. Part of that floor was used as a great storehouse, but the greater majority of the area had a much more sinister purpose, for it was there were the dungeons, the torture chambers, and the instruments of torture. A dark, dank, dismal, evil-smelling place, lit only by the flickering candles of the torches. And no one outside these 15-foot thick walls could ever hear the anguished cries of those poor unfortunates who were being put to death by deeds most foul within that small basement in there. Let's go on a bit further then, round to the other side of this tower. Before they were taken further onward to Oxford to be burned into stone. Now, the Bloody Tower was formerly called the Garden Tower because it gave access to and overlooked the lieutenant's gardens. But because of the many tragic and bloody crimes that were committed within the walls of that building, it soon got that name. And surely, one of the most tragic of all those many crimes was that of the murder of the 2 boy princes in 1483, Edward V and his brother, Richard, the Duke of York. They were allegedly murdered on the orders of their uncle, the Duke of Gloucester, who later became King Richard III. After that deed had been carried out, those 2 small bodies were taken out the following morning and secretly buried on the south side of the White Tower, to remain there for 191 years, until workmen in the reign of King Charles II, carrying out some improvements just round the corner here to the White Tower, pulled down a little stone staircase. Hidden in that staircase was found a wooden chest. Within the chest were found the remains of 2 small bodies. Experts of the day examined those remains and said that beyond any reasonable doubt, they were those of the 2 boy princes. On the orders of the king, they were removed from the tower, taken to Westminster Abbey, and placed into Innocents' Corner, where they still lie, by the way, to this day. Now, my story wouldn't be complete here if I didn't mention something about the world-famous Tower Race. One can see a lot, there's another one down there. And particularly in the summer on a nice sunny evening, this is where we normally all congregate and we talk over the events of the day, which really...
Alright, if you want to do the part of that, don't walk across, it's fine.
Here we are inside London Tower, and the guy that's giving us the tour just said that everybody that works here lives in here, and at midnight the gates are locked and everybody has to stay in, you can't get out. So they have a doctor and a priest and medical attention and everything all inside. Well, listen, we better go because the tour is leaving us. Bye.
Okay, we're in one of the parks right now in London, and I wanted to film some of these beautiful flowers, especially for Phil, so we could see what's blooming over here. I know he's into flowers, and they're so beautiful over here. Let's start over here. And I won't be able to name them, but maybe you'll know what the names are. They're so pretty. Children are all coming home from school right now. These are all private schools around here apparently. Bonjour, mes amis, comment allez-vous? As you can see, we arrived in France just this morning, and I'm working on my French. Michael's trying to teach it to me.
Bonjour mes amis, comment allez-vous?
He knows it real well. Anyway, before we talk about France, or getting to France, I want to tell you a little bit about our last day in London. We had a great time. We started off the day by going down to the Tower of London, which you saw before this, and did some touring. Then we came back and we decided to go to a local laundromat, which they don't call laundromat over here. They call it
laundrette.
Laundrette. Everything's different over here, you know. Anyway, so we went to a laundrette to do some clothes. Met some local people there, and then they said they'd watch our clothes for us to go shopping. So Mike's been looking for this little cup and saucer for the whole time that we've been here, and it's a Wedgwood cup and saucer, black on white.
It's called the Black Jasper pattern. And I've been trying to get that. I don't know why. Well, Wedgwood comes in blue and green, but I wanted the black on white. So we're in this shop, and I go to this nice-looking lady. I go, I'm trying to find something, but I don't think you have it. She says, oh, a challenge. Let me do it. I told her what I wanted, and she called and called and called. She finally got a hold of the warehouse and said they actually had 5 of them. How many did I want? Well, I said, you know, at the price, I just want 1. And she says, okay, what I'll do is I'll have my husband, who works at the warehouse, bring it home tonight. She happens to live right by the hotel. When he comes home, she'll take it, bring it over to the hotel, and voila, we'll, you know, be all set. So we made arrangements, exchanged phone numbers and addresses, and so on. Go ahead.
Well, because we talked to her for about an hour. She's a very interesting lady. Comes to find out, the clerk goes, do you know who you're talking to? And she goes, no, don't tell them. And the clerk goes, this is the owner of all the China crafts across London. And she was a very nice lady. Her Beamer was parked outside because she thought she was going to get a ticket, and she ran outside.
We saw maybe 5 of her shops. I don't know how many she has, but we saw 5 of them.
Very nice. So anyway, she was very friendly, and we, like Mike said, we exchanged numbers and names, and if she comes to the States, she sometimes comes out for shows and so forth. We're going to have dinner with her and her husband and so forth. So we go out last night, and that's another story all unto itself, but we get back to the hotel, and there's a note, very nicely written, that her husband brought home the wrong Wedgwood. It was black instead of black on white. So she wrote a note that she was very sorry and she'd refund her money, or if we liked, she'd just send it to us. So we're going to have her ship it to us. And Mike called her this morning and talked to her. But anyway, she was a very nice lady, and I feel like we've made a friend in London. But on the other side of that, last night we went out to some of the pubs and so forth. And we were in one pub that they seemed to be very interested in the Americans, so we were kind of like the center of attention, and we were standing around talking, and we must have been there for about 3.5 hours. Well, to make a long story short, we started talking to this one guy, John, or Johnny, as I think he calls himself, and he's an English guy. He wanted to show us around the town last night. So we went out with him, we did all sorts of things, went drinking, had tequila. He took us to like the really hip part of town.
Trendy. He was talking to people in the streets. I guess he knew them. So.
Yes. Anyway, we didn't get into the room this morning till like 3:30. Get to sleep, and we had to wake up at 5. So, and we haven't been to sleep since. But the energy level is high. But again, we made another friend. We exchanged numbers. He's in film, and he's actually a duke, though. You know, he's not like a Duke of Earl or anything like that. It's a weird thing over here, but he's a very nice guy, and we'll be writing to him and so forth. So I feel like we've made 2 friends in London yesterday, and it was really quite nice. So today we're in Paris, and we just got in. We're going to head down to have lunch, and already everything is very expensive here. But the hotel, we found out on the way here that we're staying at a very exclusive part of Paris. It's the center of Paris, and this hotel is very exclusive, and later on we'll go through the hotel, hopefully, if they let us, and film some of this stuff. I mean, the furniture outside and so forth is very beautiful. Anyway, we'll see you guys later. Bye.
In the 17th century. at the time of Louis XIV. Now, Louis XIV is an important king in French history. He was nicknamed the Sun King, the king who built the Palace of Versailles. And the gardens were made by the landscape gardener who also created the gardens of Versailles. The name was André Le Nôtre. It's French style, that is very formal. It's not natural much, but a French style garden is it's formal, that is, you have straight path, they trim the trees, everything is organized to follow the laws of geometry and symmetry. So 17th century for that garden. And we'll follow for a little while the Rivoli street. The part that will follow here is all lined with arcades. And that's Italian style. It's an idea. That part was created here at the time of Napoleon I. Rivoli, it's one of his victory during the Italian campaign. So he brought back from Italy the idea of lining the street with arcades, Italian style. Usually in Italy, it's to protect you from the sun, here from the rain and the wind, but it's the same idea, a covered passage like this. You can walk all along without being bothered by the weather. So you have, of course, lots of shops, so you can walk all along here and not bother about the rain. Now, you will see we're going to reach the largest square in France, so also in Paris, of course, Concorde Square. And the square was created in the 18th century, and it was in those days a royal square that is dedicated to a king, square Louis XV, and there was the statue of the king right in the center. But of course, during the revolution, monarchy was officially abolished, no more king, and at the time they destroyed all the representations of kings and monarchy, so the statue that used to stand in the center was also destroyed. The name of the square was also changed into the Revolution Square, and here they placed at the time a guillotine, this machine to behead people. Now the guillotine stood there about a year, in between the years 1793-1794. The guillotine in those days was nicknamed the National Razor, and they beheaded on this square about 1,200 people, including the ill-fated King Louis XVI, beheaded in January 1793, Queen Marie Antoinette the same year, but in October, that is a few months later. She was 2 weeks short of her 38th birthday when she was beheaded. They also beheaded other members of the French nobility, such as, for example, the first husband of Josephine. When she married Napoleon, she was a widow with 2 children, as the first husband had been beheaded. But not that many victims were actually noblemen, about 10%, and all the other victims of the guillotine, of the National Razor, were opponents of the regime. That is, there was a parliament, different factions and parties, and they all sent each other to the guillotine in a growing confusion, so they all ended up beheaded. And after the fall of Robespierre, they started to cool down a little bit. The guillotine was taken away from the square. They changed the name again. It became Concorde Square, meaning truce and peace. And it's in the 19th century that they placed in the center, what you can see right now on your left, this obelisk, which is an Egyptian monument. It's coming from the Temple of Luxor in Egypt. It was a gift of Egypt to France, and it was offered to King Charles X. But by the time it arrived, a few years later, the king had changed, and it's another king, Louis Philippe, who received it. Now here to your right, you have 2 large palaces. They were designed by the architect who laid out the square, called Gabriel. So they house different ministries, the deluxe hotel as well. And on the square, you have very long perspectives here. Now on your left, first of all, you have those white tents. Those are not there regularly, usually. That's for Sunday. Next Sunday they have the marathon in Paris. So that they will they will start from here. That's for the marathon. On your left, the Tuileries Gardens, taking you to the courtyard of the Louvre. And here you have the beginning, we'll see them again, of course, of the Champs-Élysées. So that's part of a very long perspective, east-west in the city, going in between different arches. Now, for the first time, and re-elected in '88 for the second mandate. Here, a president has a 7-year mandate. So he's in office if everything goes well for him until '95. He could run for a third mandate. There's nothing against that in France, but he would be too old. Now he's 75. So by 95, he'd be too old to run for a third mandate, and he probably wouldn't be elected if the socialist government has a lot of problems at the moment. They are very low in popularity in France, especially because of the prime minister. Maybe you heard about her, lady prime minister we have since last year, Edith Cresson. She's the most unpopular lady in France, along with the meter maids, actually. And so that's a problem for the government, the prime minister they have. Although that was considered as an incredible choice last year when she was named, because you know that women had the right to vote in France very late. Only in 1946 did French women have the right to vote. So it's recent. Now we'll follow a little bit along this, of course, including the popular Impressionist period. So it's in Orsay today that you see the Impressionist, but also sculptures, architecture is presented with maquettes of the. You see all around the flying buttresses, those arches to maintain the width. So you can compare your number with the number of any famous people that ate there before you. That is, they gave all the ducks a number, precise number. Now we'll go towards Notre Dame on the other island. They started to build a cathedral in 1163. Starting, of course, with the choir, so they could have masses, consecrate the church, have masses. Then, gradually, they would get to the facade and the towers. So, most of the work was done in 60 years, so up to 1220. It's, of course, an example of Gothic architecture. You know that the architecture for the stained glass windows, of course. You know it for the gargoyles as well. You know the gargoyles are rain spouts. To project away from the different carving, the rain, so it doesn't wash along the facade and it doesn't erode the stone. You know also Notre Dame because of the Hunchback. Now the Hunchback is actually very, very important for Notre Dame. It's fiction, of course, but that novel by Victor Hugo actually saved the cathedral from destruction. You know, when the revolution broke out, Notre Dame was used as a warehouse, and the revolution abolished not only monarchy but religion. No more God, no more church. So the cathedral was used for other purposes, damaged a lot, and at the beginning of the 19th century it was falling apart. It was in a very bad condition. The book of Victor Hugo was published in 1831. Victor Hugo was then 29 years old. It was his first important novel. And with that book, and with the fashion of the historical novels, the past became fashionable. People realized Notre Dame was falling apart, and they started to restore many, many historical buildings in France, not only Notre Dame, but other churches, residences, and so on. Now, here's what we'll do. We will walk to Notre Dame. Since it's not very sunny, I will take you inside, explain a little bit more in detail about the history of Notre Dame. Then you will get some free time. If you want to walk around, take pictures, we'll walk here through the garden. But of course you have the other street to take you to the facade where you have different shops and cafes if you want to drink something warm. This is a busy place, meaning you have tourists and around the...
building. So you see a soul right now in the balance, in between Saint Michael and the devil, in between the forces of good and evil, and look at the devil, it's pushing. It's cheating to get more souls in hell. Now behind Saint Michael going towards the left, the saints. They're going to paradise, they look up at the sky, they're very serene. Behind the devil, chained, but damned. See, between two demons. And look at the difference in between the saints and the damned. They don't seem very happy, but that's the way it goes. They're going to hell, too bad. And on the side, you see you have all the ribs on both sides of the center part. Look at the bottom part of the ribs to the right. You see hell, tortures, demons, and the flames of hell burning. And the first one, first rib to the right. You see? One down, falling headward. Okay? The last horizontal part we have, right at the bottom, that's the resurrection of the dead. In the corners, it shows that the tree fence of judgment is made, and all the dead getting up on the tree, the stone. And so different people presented. You can recognize the queen as she's still wearing the crown. There's the soldier. There's the bishop. Dedicated 20 years of his life into rebuilding Notre Dame, restoring, adding again gargoyles, stained glass windows, adding sculptures. It was all redone, but it was criticized. Usually, well, everything is criticized, but in the 19th century, it was not always accurate. The restoration was halfway in between restoration and imagination. That is, they recreated the past according to how they thought it was. So sometimes it's a little bit overdone, romantic, colorful, as they thought it was. It's not always very accurate, and Benedict was criticized because of that. They said he invented too much. Pero qué maravilla. Esta galería.
There's a statue symbolizing Notre Dame.
It's very dark in Notre Dame. It's lit by few lights but mostly candles.
Some large monuments, some royal creations, all going west again. That is, we're going in circle. Here you can recognize to the right the main city hall of Paris. If you look in front, there's a large square, and in the background you see this very colorful building. You will see, just after we pass this bus, you'll see tubes and pipes of bright colors, blue, green, and red. And that's the technical facade of the Pompidou Center, also known as Beaubourg. Yes, it's named after President Pompidou, who loved modern art, modern architecture, so they decided to build this center to house the National Museum of Modern Art. So what you will see is the one facade, what they call the technical facade. They have rejected outside the building all the technical functions, that is all the different tubes and pipes, and every color corresponds to the function. The blue being for the ventilation air conditioning system, the green for the water supply. Look here to the right, you see the background of the square, the blue tubes. It's very high tech. It's built while inaugurated in 1977. So that's one facade. On the other side, there's a very large gallery of statues. Just above the portal, you have this line of statues, 28 kings. Those are kings of the Old Testament. But when the revolution broke out, everybody had forgotten who those kings were. They thought they were kings of France, and they were all destroyed. That's part of the destruction realized during the French Revolution. Those statues were then restored by Viollet-le-Duc. And here we have part of the Latin Quarter. If you look on both sides, you see the medieval city planning, town planning, narrow streets, no sidewalk, the gutter right in the central part of the street. This spot here has kept more or less the planning, well, as it was in the Middle Ages. And this is part of the Latin Quarter. Actually, it's an old part of the city, and it's been since the beginning, since the very start, the area for the students. So they created here faculties, schools, colleges, and that's why it was known as Latin Quarter. In the Middle Ages already, Paris was an intellectual center. Students were coming from lots of other countries, and they needed a common language for all of them, and it was Latin. Of course, they always gave classes in Latin. So that's why the area for the students was known traditionally as the Latin Quarter. The name was kept. The most prestigious school in this Latin Quarter is, of course, the Sorbonne. Sorbonne, which is also one of the oldest schools, founded in the 13th century. So by a man called Robert of Sorbonne. So from Sorbonne came Sorbonne, the school he founded. It was a school only for 16 students of theology. Then it was enlarged to include other studies. And then what you have here to the right, starting here, is the building of the Sorbonne. It's all 19th century. Today the Sorbonne is for the classical studies, that is languages, ancient and modern, philosophy, archaeology. It's just one faculty of the University of Paris, and then you have other faculties throughout the Latin Quarter and in the suburbs. They have started to decentralize university, not to have too many students in one part of Paris and avoid like this problems with the students. But you have registered in the different faculties in Paris 200,000 students. Half of them drop out in the first year. The conditions are very difficult, overcrowded classes, not enough teachers, so it's not very easy to study. So, but the Sorbonne is quite, well, the most popular faculty would be the law faculty, law school. And here you have the law school, part of the law school. And we've been driving up sort of a hill. And just after the traffic light, if you look on your left, you'll see on top of the hill a special building, very classical, a cupola surrounded by columns. It's called a Pantheon. It was meant to be a church in the 18th century, and they finished the church when the revolution broke out. So of course they decided not to use it as a church, but as a temple instead, a burial place for patriots. And it was a coincidence, but one member of the revolution, a man called Mirabeau, had just died. So they said, very well, we'll bury Mirabeau inside. Burial place. 2 years later, they found out that Mirabeau had been double-dealing. He had worked for the monarchy and the revolution. He was not a hero any longer, he was taken out. Instead, they buried another man who was taken out later on also. You see, they changed the people buried, and they changed the vocation of the building 6 times throughout the 19th century to follow the changes in regime. So you'll have it on the left here, the Pantheon. It was the model for the Capitol in Washington. It's an idea that was brought back by Thomas Jefferson. He had, of course, lived in France for a while, and he came back with that idea to build the Capitol. See the cupola and the columns around. So actually, as I was telling you, in the 19th century we had kings again, monarchy, republics, empires and all that. So every new regime would turn back the building into a church, a temple and so on. So it was a church, but they had buried at the time Voltaire. You know, Voltaire was totally anti-clerical, against the church. And when they turned it into a church, they had the tomb of Voltaire inside. People of the time were shocked. They said, well, let's take him out. He's a pagan monster, he shouldn't be there. And the king of the period said, no, Voltaire will remain there. It will be very good for him to hear mass twice a day. So they kept the tomb of Voltaire. That is, today it is a burial place, officially since 1885, death of Victor Hugo. So you have about 60 people buried into the crypt of the Pantheon. They have lots of room, but they don't admit that many. It's all for the, well, writers, scientists, politicians, military men are buried in this Pantheon. Sur la droite. Oui, parce que là, ça roule pas vite. C'est-à-dire qu'on passe sur la droite, on passe devant le Sénat, puis quand on arrive à Saint-Sulpice, on tourne à droite pour la porte. The main axis of the Latin Quarter is the Boulevard Saint-Michel, which is in front of us. It goes, well, it connects this garden in front to the Seine River. So the Latin Quarter is always very, very animated. You have lots of printer editors, for example. They have lots of shop for books, school books, but also small cinemas. So it's always quite animated. And in the heart of this area, you have a large public garden. It's in front of us. We'll drive around part of it. It's called Luxembourg Garden. And it was created in the 17th century, early 17th century, along with a palace of the same name. Everything created for a Queen of France, Mary of Medici. She was Italian. She married Henry IV. She was more, I would say she was the silliest queen we had. A real shrew, too. Anyways, after the death of Henry IV, the husband, she decided to have a new residence built. This area was at the time very quiet. It was almost a countryside, so she bought a land. They built a residence and they created the gardens, which was not at all public in those days. It was the personal garden of the Queen. Then it was open to the public. And this Luxembourg garden is very, very popular. First of all, there are lots of activities you can do. You have tennis courts, so you can play tennis. You have courts to play bocce balls, which is a very popular game in France. You have an apiculture school, beehives, and thousands of bees, and they produce honey that they sell. They have greenhouses for exotic plants and flowers. They have a horticulture school, so you can learn about plants and growing flowers and all that. The small children have a theater for Muppets, we call the Guignol, so they can go and see the plays with the Muppets. They can also have a ride on a mule, donkeys. They can rent small sailboats on the ponds. So there are lots of things to do. Students go there in the spring when it's nice to skip classes, so it's packed with students in the spring. And you can go there not to do anything but just sit on a bench, read a book, and enjoy the green spaces. That is, it's a very pleasant garden, always filled with students and children. And here on the left, this is the former palace of Mary of Medici, built according on the Italian style, and today it's the Senate. It's housing the senators, so you cannot visit it any longer. It's not open to the public. The senators also administrate the garden. They have about 50 gardeners to take care of the Luxembourg garden. They have also a bandstand in the garden, a very old merry-go-round with wooden horses of the 18th century. Well, lots of things. So that's another section here of the Luxembourg garden. Most of it is laid out in the French style. The part here, the area here on the left, is English style garden, more natural, although it's all artificial. Rive gauche. Everybody will know what you mean. It means it's when it's left bank, it's artistic, maybe a little extravagant. But you can say that and no problem, that you will be understood. Now here you can recognize the southern wing of the Louvre again. Very imposing, of course. I was telling you a little bit about this glass pyramid, which is, we won't see it from here. It's in the center of the courtyard. The problem with the glass pyramid is that to design a new entrance, there was no contest. Usually you have a contest, different architects present projects, and then they choose one. Here there was no contest. Pay was chosen directly by Mitterrand. So they saw that as an arbitrary choice, and many said it was too modern to fit in the courtyard of the Louvre. But as you know, people are usually very reluctant to accept changes. They are used to something, and French people are very traditionalist. So this glass pyramid shocked many, but anything ever built in Paris was criticized in its own time. So it's normal not to accept drastic changes like that. You know that when for example, when the Impressionist painters started to paint the way they did, they were the laughing stock of society. And today their paintings are worth a lot. But always the ones breaking the rules are not accepted, and then, well, what can you do? So here you still have Orsay. Just next door, here on the left, that was the hotel that was built next door to the train station, to the entrance for the museum. And they have kept the former dining room of the hotel, which is today the restaurant of the museum, with the decoration of 1900, the decoration of the time. Now, as we go on, just further ahead, down on the Seine River, you'll see a sort of a structure on the river. It's a public swimming pool, an open-air swimming pool, which is one of the few, it's the only open-air swimming pool in downtown Paris, and it's 200 years old. Sit down on the river. So 200 years old means there were started the very first swimming lessons and first swimsuits, and then the fashion in swimwear was always started there. First bikinis, topless and all that. So today it's, well, at the moment it's closed, of course, still, but in the summertime there's a deck where people sunbathe. And around the deck there's a gate going on, the bridge with it. And here on the left, the French Parliament. It's also called the Bourbon Palace. It has nothing to do with the drink. No. Yes. Now we have in Paris 34 bridges. The next one you have here to the right is considered as one of the most elegant, built in 1900 and named after a Tsar of Russia, Alexander III. At the time there was a Franco-Russian alliance. You see the bridge has kept the decoration 1900, beautiful lamppost. And at the extremities of the bridge you have those columns with the decoration. So it's very loved by fashion magazines. Very often when we pass you have models, they're taking pictures for fashion magazines. They use it a lot as a sit-in. They use a lot Concord Square, but this bridge also. Left, and we'll drive around this very large building that you can see at the end of the perspective and this very broad facade. This is called the Invalids Mansion, and it was built at the time of Louis XIV. Now Louis XIV, as I told you, is very important in the French history. The Sun King who built Versailles. He also had the longest reign in French history. He became king, he was 5. He died, he was 77. So he was actually king for a period of 72 years. What is this? I don't know. Don't ask me, I don't know what I don't know what it is. Those gray trucks. Well, Louis XIV then had a very long reign. And during this period, France was involved in 5 different wars, because the country was bankrupt, was ruined with those permanent wars. And the soldiers, either too old to fight any longer or that were wounded became disabled, had no pension, had no security. And the king decided to do something for them, that is to clean up the street from all the beggars, former soldiers. So they built for the soldiers a veterans mansion. So that's the one you have in front, and the Invalids Mansion. There was a veteran hospital and a place where the old soldiers, the disabled ones, could live for the rest of their life. So according on the time, on the period, wartime or not, there were about 4,000 soldiers living inside this mansion. If you look at the facade, it's very, very long, but very sober. Always you have a few elements to remind you of the military vocation. For example, if you look at the dormer windows, you will see that they are carved, all of them, like a sort of a medieval armor with a helmet on top, always those weapons and things like that. Just above the main door, you can see Louis XIV on horseback, a bas-relief. A despot, well, you have different points of view, still is popular. And but the most popular historical figure for the French is not Napoleon, it's General de Gaulle. But Napoleon was first for a very long time, now it's de Gaulle first and Napoleon is second. 2 soldiers. Well, so when he died, he wrote in his will, he was sent into exile by the British on St. Helena's Island. He died in 1821, he was 51. And he wrote in his will that he wanted to be buried in France. But the body was brought back much later, 19 years later, as they didn't want to bring him back. his son at the time was still living, and they had kings again, and the kings didn't want to bring back the body of Napoleon because they thought they would be overthrown. He was popular, worshipped by the former soldiers. His son was living still, so maybe there would be a movement against monarchy and for the Bonaparte family. So the body was brought back after things had cooled off a little bit and after the son had died. So in 1840. Oui, Champlain, c'est plus suffragane. But the main thing to know is that when it was built, nobody liked it. It was criticized for everything. First of all, as a novelty, as I told you, all the new things. But the tower basically was built for the fair of 1889, and the organizers wanted to have for that fair a metallical tower, the highest possible. And that was to be the main event of the fair, metallical tower. A contest was organized, many projects presented, and they chose the project of an engineer, Gustave Eiffel. He had built previously bridges and viaducts, but in iron. He was a specialist of iron, of metallical architecture. He's also the one who realized the metallical structure inside the Statue of Liberty in New York. That's also his work. So the project was chosen, presented to the public with different drawings, different maquettes, and as soon as it was presented to the general public, everybody started to criticize. And everything was criticized. First of all, a few artists, musicians, architects, writers criticized the aesthetical point of view. They said it was the ugliest thing they had seen. They said it would look like the chimney of a factory. See, iron was something industrial, so they said iron was not noble enough for Paris. It was vulgar to have a metallical tower. You know, Paris was not for the stone facade, the carved work. So So in spite of all the problems, the tower was built in 2 years, inaugurated as planned in the spring of 1889, and it was at the time the highest monument in the world. 300 meters, it's just around 1,000 feet. It stayed the highest monument until they built the Empire State Building in New York in 1931. So you have 3 levels, 3 floors. On the first floor you have restaurants, 2 of them, one on top of the other. You have a post office, and they have a special stamp of the Eiffel Tower. You have a small cinema, and they show you archive movies all about the Eiffel Tower. On the second floor, you have one of the best restaurants in Paris. They have their private lift to go directly from the bottom into the restaurant, and it's dedicated to Jules Verne, the writer of science fiction books. Verne, you pronounce Jules Verne? Jules Verne, in French. Well, anyways, then of course at the very top, you can go. There's the platform, and the engineer had his private office at the top. Eiffel could go there, give appointment, receive people, work, but he had his office at the top. That monument is also private. The Eiffel Tower does not belong to the state. At first, it belonged to the engineer himself, and then he founded a society to administer the tower, so it's a private monument. And as I told you, it was to stay there 20 years, and then it would be destroyed. But 20 years after the inauguration, they decided to put an antenna on top, telegraph antenna, so it became useful, center of communication, and it was saved and kept thanks to the antenna. And today you have to go along with it, a TV antenna. Along the years, of course, it was a setting for experiments. People, inventors of prototypes of parachutes would jump from the first floor. 60 meters, it's 200 feet, it's not high enough. Others would climb the tower, usually on publicity bets. They would do things like that. In 89, there's a man, a tightrope walker, Philippe Petit, exactly. He walked in between the first floor of the Eiffel Tower and the terrace of the palace right in front of us. And that was to celebrate the Declaration of Human Rights. So he walked all along the road in between the 2 buildings. It took him more than an hour because he was having stops on the way and all that. And when he landed safely on the terrace, he read the Declaration of Human Rights. A small village west of the city that was eventually connected to Paris. In 1860, the city was enlarged, and it passed from 12 to 20 city districts. So they connected all the neighboring villages. So here there were 4 villages, they were connected, and they became the 16th district. If you want to know in what district you are, it's very easy. You know that we have always at the street corners the blue plates where they write the name of the street. Usually above the name of the street you have a number followed by ARR. That's the number of the arrondissement, the city district. 20 of these. Gained a reputation of being able to face Rolls-Royce and Jaguar and Ferrari cars.
Bonjour, comment allez-vous? Je suis bien. Que belle journée. Hi everybody, well this is our last day in France, and we're wrapping up, and as I said good morning, how is everybody? It's a beautiful day outside, and yesterday was kind of exciting coming back to the hotel. Victor ran into Seal, the rock star. I was out getting a soda, and Victor saw him, recognized him, went up to him and asked if he could take a picture, and Victor got a picture standing next to Seal, and everybody was snapping and exciting, so that was kind of neat. And that's about it today. It wraps up, so alors, au revoir.
And you made a lot of friends here, Mike?
I made a lot of friends here.
Yeah, we've made a lot of friends with people on the tour and address exchanges. And
au revoir, mes amis.
Was conceived and finished when they had no cars yet. So they could not know and figure what a mess they would create for the modern traffic. You see, it's rather busy at the moment, but when it's rush hour, and then we come here, I don't speak, nobody is listening. No, you have the cars coming from all directions. This is a madhouse at rush hour. And if you want to have great pictures of Paris, you go to the top of the monument at rush hour. Looking down, you don't see the cobblestones. You just see the tops of the cars going in all directions like this.
Qu'est-ce qu'ils font là? Tu crois qu'ils vont mettre une affiche pour le marathon? Ils s'en foutent. Did you see that? People on the facade? Yeah. They're going to put a, I don't know where.
Tu te mets bien sur la gauche parce qu'on va tourner après à gauche là. C'est super bien. In the front is the church dedicated to Saint Augustine Church. It's a 19th century church, very large, very massive, like all our churches of the 19th century. That were made for providing first enough space to the worshippers, but also to attract people. Believe in God. Believe in the power of this church, Catholic Church. That's how come the churches were so big. It was the time the Sacré-Cœur was built almost, up in Montmartre on the hillside. On va tourner à gauche là, dans la rue de la Borde. Taking you